Hey guys, it's Emily. Welcome back to my channel. Thank you for coming by today. This video is part 2 of my monthly wrap-up for the month of May. The first part I'll leave down below, where I talk about my top 3 books of the month and my bottom 2 books, and then these are all the books that are kind of in the middle. Some are really good, some are just mediocre, and we're just going to talk about them. In total, I read 11 books in the month of May, and so 6 books are in this video. This month was definitely one of those that I just read whatever suit my fancy. There wasn't a particular genre, which was something on my mind because I kind of went all over the place, including a poetry book, which is something I never do. So let's just get into this. The first one I'll talk about is Cinder. This is the first of the Lunar Chronicles, and this is by Marissa Meyer. And this book is a rendition of Cinderella. You guys know I like those different versions of fairy tales, and this one is really unique. I put it in like the middle of the row because I'm just not someone who likes like iRobot or anything that's about cyborgs, and Cinder is a cyborg, so she is part human, part robot. And you know, this is the first moment that you meet her. She is a mechanic, and she meets the prince because he needs her to fix something. And this is, I can't give too much away because it is part of a series, but I did enjoy it, and I did like that it really did not feel like a Cinderella story because it kind of had a whole separate element of it. So there are the Lunas who live on the moon, and they are threatening Earth with a war, and so there's a lot of political aspects in it. Now there is a play going on, which unfortunately one of her sisters, who the sisters and the mother really aren't horrible, they aren't really evil. I feel like they just have really bad things going on in their lives, and I can see why they are like that. So I enjoyed that they weren't like mean. Now you find out in the first few chapters that her sister ends up having the plague, and so she is taken away, and Cinder tries to help find a cure for that, but also help the prince, and it really just makes it a completely different story than Cinderella. You really have no clue where it's going, and it did leave you off hanging. Like, it does make you want to read a second book. The only reason it's in like this pairing versus being in like my top books is just I'm just not a technical reader. Things about robots and cyborgs, just it's a little too much for me. I don't mind fairies and mystical creatures, but when it comes to like this type of thing, it's just not my style. But it was good, and I did enjoy it, and it was not predictable, and I would probably read the second one because I really don't know how it would go. Like, I'm trying to think of how it would go because it does kind of leave you hanging. So I really did enjoy this one. So the next book we have is At the Edge of the Orchard by Tracy Chevalier. It's a historical fiction where at the very first bits of the book it is actually back and forth between a husband and a wife, and they have a very difficult relationship. It is like seriously broken. There's like a all-out war going on all about apple trees, and him wanting some sweet like eating apples, and then she wants more apples that she can make some hard apple cider with, and there's just like it is a situation. You actually feel bad for their children because they're kind of stuck in the middle of all this, and it's just really was really depressing, and I wasn't sure if I was going to continue reading because it was just like back and forth about this like war that's pretty much going on in their family and the dysfunctional relationship. But I'm glad that I powered through because that's when it got really good. Once you get to the part about Robert, who is their youngest son, and it's about him going out west, going to California. He brings his love of trees with him, and he ends up going to Sequoia National Park, which it wasn't then, but he's like discovering the trees. And it sounds really boring when I say it out loud, but I actually have gone there. We went to the Sequoia National Park 2 years ago, and I just feel like it kind of just made a little bit more sense to me, and it was a little bit more relevant to me. But the book was not predictable at all. There was several twists at the end, and I just really enjoyed the storyline from him on, because his history kind of comes back to him, and just interesting books. But I will say the first bit kind of made it so it wasn't as good, but you kind of do see his history in the struggles that he went through and the struggles of that time period. It was a really good book if you like historical fiction and you don't mind reading about a bunch of trees. It was pretty good. I did enjoy it. It was definitely different for me to read. Next we have a poetry book. So this is The Sun and Her Flowers by Rupi Carr? Yes? I'm not a poetry person. I did a couple literature classes in college, and those poems are just like all the symbolism and all like the crazy wording and old English, and you're just like hurting after a while because you're trying to decipher this poem. That is not this book. This book is probably the easiest to read as far as poetry goes. I mean, some pages only have like a few words on it. I will say I did enjoy the poems that actually had like full stanzas and full pages of stuff, because I just enjoyed it. I feel like it moved me a little bit more than just like a quote. And I will say, even though this is it's for the everyday person, everyone can understand it. It does kind of go in progression where different chapters where it's about loss, and then you have one about her being broken, and then you have one about her having some self-love, which was just a little awkward to be reading about masturbation, and there's like a diagram. Like, it is just a little weird. I didn't really relate to a lot of it because there was a part about her being a child of immigrants. And then there's some good things and there's some bad things. I feel like all of the poems though seemed even though they're very easy to understand, they seemed really watered down. And I kind of wished I did have some poems that kind of made me think a little bit more than what these ones did. So it was good, and I can see why people like her writing. It's very easy to read, but honestly, if I was to read a poem, I kind of do want to have like a little bit of thought process. Does that make sense? Like, I want it to make me just feel a little bit smarter when reading it. I don't know if this is going to make sense, but I did enjoy it. I don't think I would pick up any more of her stuff, especially since I heard that this one has similar things as Milk and Honey. I've not read her first book, but I don't know. I'm usually not a poetry person, but if I'm going to read poetry, I guess I want to have just poetry that makes me think a little bit more. Does that make sense? Next we have Wonder by R.J. Palacio, and I did do a separate video on it. I'll leave it up in the cards, but this is about a boy named Augie who has some deformities in his face, but he is a normal kid, and he is going to school for the first time as, I think he is 11 or 12 or 10. That age, middle school. So he's going to school for the first time, but his face is severely deformed, and this book is just really happy. Like, you can see the struggles that he's going through, but it's just, he's such a loving soul, and he's such a happy person, and so many people are on his side that it really just, it's just very moving and just really just happy. Like, the writing is for middle schoolers, and it is from a middle school perspective, so it's very easy to read. My nephew, who is 12, has read it, and he really enjoyed it. So if you have maybe a son or daughter who's having a difficulty in reading, he did really enjoy it, and it does do a really great job of it. Just teaching about bullying, teaching about acceptance, and I really liked it. And it would probably be in my top books, but the other ones just kind of excited me a little bit more. This one, again, easy to read. I did enjoy the storyline. It just made me happy. I did cry at the end. I did really enjoy this book. I'm definitely interested in reading the sequel to it. Next we have Orphan Train by Christina Baker Klein, and this one was a recommendation from my sister who raved and raved about it, and I'm sure if she's looking at this video, she's gonna be like, hey, I did really like this. But for me, it was like a 3-star book, and it's about Molly, who goes to help this woman, Vivian, who is an older 90-year-old woman up in the state of Maine, and Molly is in the foster care system, and she finds out that Vivian was actually part of the Orphan Train, which was back in the 40s from New York, and they would take orphans on a train and then kind of like sell them, but they were free children, but they had to be on display in the West. Like, they would travel out west and they would give them away to other families who would just like pick them up. There was no like any type of diving in of who these people were. These kids were dropped off into really horrible situations. Some had good situations, but Vivian, who was one of the orphans, had some really horrible experiences, and Molly learns about her and they connect. And I did enjoy the historical fiction bits of it. So Vivian's story I liked when it was written in like the historical timeline. I really did enjoy it. Her life was really hard. She was in really bad situations. I'm not going to go into it because I don't want to spoil it, but I did enjoy that part. It was the part where Molly came in that I was just like, okay, it just seems like an everyday foster care child situation, like something like The Fosters, you know. It just seemed kind of repetitive to other things that I've seen, where she of course has a bad situation, she acts out, she's in the foster care system, you know, which I know it's horrible in those types of situations, but I feel like the writing, it's always like they have a bad foster parent, and there's plenty of good foster parents out there, and I know some in my personal life who have helped children, and they aren't these horrible people that they make it seem to be in the Orphan Train. So I think that's why it's so low in my rating, is because it's just, Molly's side is just very, it's just, I'm over it. And then Vivian's side I did enjoy, so I feel like Vivian's side actually boosted it up a bit in my ratings, but I don't know, it was good. I don't think I'd read the second one that's coming out, so there's that. The final book is one that I have read a number of times. I think I've read it 4 times, and it is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, and it's so good. So it's a classic book, but it's one that is not written in Old English or anything. It's easy to read, and it's about Jane, who becomes an orphan, and she lives in this asylum, well, like an orphanage, and she ends up graduating and becoming a governess to this older gentleman, this older nobleman. His name is Mr. Rochester, and she kind of has like this love interest in him, but he's like old, he's like father old. And so she likes him, and there's like this weird like love triangle. There's also like this mystery part of like something wrong is going on in the house, and it's really easy to read for a classic novel, and there is a lot of suspense and mystery in it, and I liked her whole storyline, and the ending is not predictable at all. I just really enjoy this one. Like every time I read it, I'm just like happy, and I think it's just because it's a classic book. It's really good. If you have a hard time reading a classic and you want to find something that maybe is easier to understand, I really enjoy it. I obviously enjoy it because I've read it a few times. Yeah, I liked it. Can you tell? I will also say that Jane Eyre, the book, is 10 times better than the movie version. So if you've seen the movie and you're not, like, it's completely different. So I would say read the book if you've seen the movie and you didn't like it, because it's so good. Anyways, that's all I have for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. I will hopefully be uploading a little bit more. I just been having a hard time filming lately because kids are out of school and it's loud in the daytime, and just things have been going on. Anyways, that's all I have for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys in my next one.